Hey, this is Buckley, and I'm recording another MVP Buzz Chat video, and I'm here with, again, where are you based out of? Where's home? Is it the Toronto area, right? Or
Toronto, yes.
Okay, so we have Haniel, that is, I'm sure I almost got the name pronounced correctly, but why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about where you are, what you're doing, what your role is.
Sure. My name is Haniel Croitoru. I'm a Microsoft MVP, SharePoint consultant. I've been working in the field for about 13 years, based out of Toronto. Personally, love automation. My motto is that I'm lazy, so if I can have somebody else do the work or some other system do the work,
yeah. Well, that's really the secret to most automation. It's inherent laziness on the for developers and IT pros. We just don't want to do it. It's those repeated tasks, and it's like no one wants to do that job, and let's just automate.
That's right. I've just gone through tax season and setting up a whole environment last year where everything is pretty much automated, and just having it done in about 15 minutes was great. And I mean, in the past, it was a matter of scanning and Excels and all of that, and that's all history now.
Well, that is cool too, because so much like you go and log into, like, we've got TurboTax here, and you log in there and it says, hey, are you still with the same employer? Yes. Pulls it all down. Hey, here it all is. And so does a lot of that pre-work for you. That's kind of the, interesting. I had another conversation yesterday talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning and what we can expect, because the person I was speaking with was very unimpressed with the current slate of different tools and wasn't seeing certain things. And we had this whole conversation about how, well, to have that level of automation, you need to make sure that you've got the right signals, the right data that you're able to build off of. And as you add that in, it improves your chance of doing things. But I think in this era where we seem to retain all information from all systems, whether we ever use it, look at it ever again, but there's an opportunity for automation right there, because we keep everything. We're hoarders. We're data hoarders.
Absolutely. And it's funny when you use the word hoarder, because I look at entire cabinets, and I went down this road about
the entire cabinets behind me. Is that what you're talking about? That's what you're thinking there, right? Yeah.
No, they're probably empty and filled with some good drinks and other things, but I had entire cabinets, and just literally just going through them and eliminating more and more paper, and now being able to just access it from anywhere, anytime I need, it's great. It's literally saving me a ton of time. So whenever possible, I try to get everything electronic. Whenever I get a piece of paper, it goes into the scanner and it goes into the shredder, and I never think about it again. I love it.
Yeah, one of my first jobs, I worked for a company, I don't know if remember them, EDS. So it was the consulting company Ross Perot started. He had already been gone when I started there, but so in the early 90s, he was off running for president or something. But went to work, and I was a business analyst and technical writer, and I would go in and work with the engineering teams and swap out documentation. And it was literally go and find it. They would, in the COBOL, they would like flower box the comments, that I'd go capture the stuff, talk to the engineers about what needs to change the documentation, print out the changes, add a new page, within this hierarchy of content.
Right.
Drive across town to a Beacon storage facility, where I go through their Dewey Decimal System, whatever it was, to find the right box. Pull it down, find the right binder, open it up, swap out or insert a new page for the documentation, put it back, drive back to the office. And I did that 2-3 times a week for these guys. And one of the first projects that I had for them was starting to digitize their content. So this was like 93, 94, somewhere down there. And just, so I would learn that lesson, one, managing that kind of content in that way. And somebody would ask a question and be like, I have no idea. We'd have to go, dig through boxes and binders to find some of the answers to these things.
Yeah.
And moving it to digital, I mean, just changed everything.
It changed everything, and it's interesting that you mentioned that you would be driving across town and somebody else would be managing the boxes and somebody else would be doing some other task. And a lot of times when you talk to people about automation today, it's similar to when you talk to people about going into the cloud. Right away, IT people think, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job, right? Servers are gone. What am I going to do now? Same thing's happening with automation. I find is that a lot of times people are afraid that their jobs are going to be gone because what they used to do, which are very mundane tasks, are all of a sudden becoming automated. And the reality is that this is a great time. This is a great opportunity for people to augment their skills, learn something new, and focus on innovation and something that they can do for a company to really be on the forefront rather than just sitting and doing very repetitive tasks that are typically low level, sometimes high risk in terms of duplication of content or transcription. So I definitely think that everybody, where possible, automation is not for everything, but where possible, it can, there's many benefits to it.
Well, I mean, the other side, get your thoughts on this too. It's for one, it's not like most organizations, most enterprises can't just flip a switch and move to the cloud. And that's why hybrid environments will be around for a long time, because will be that need. And because there's hybrid, even if you went pure cloud, moved all of your systems across, or are a smaller, younger company that just started in the cloud day one and move forward, you still need to have people that understand that former world, that understand the networks, the services that are being provided, and the technology to go and build that kind of automation. Understand how the services run and what needs to happen locally versus with that MSP or with that OEM providing that platform.
Right. Yeah.
So I mean, the kind of stuff you're doing. I mean, when you talking about automation, and that is there's a loaded kind of term out there. So what are the kind of things that you're doing that you're working with customers on? I mean, what are some practical applications of automation that you're working with customers on today?
So some of the common examples are when we have clients who are today on premises and they decide to make a move to the cloud, or they're in the cloud and they just want to improve their internet, their environment. Often this is an opportunity to do some house cleaning, look at everything that they have, all of their content, and reorganize it. And then one of the questions that often comes up is, well, we have all these documents, these procedures, these policies, these forms, and what do we do with them? Do we just move them into the cloud? And this is often where I open up the conversation to say, you're taking a great step in reorganizing your content. Now, why don't you take one step further and say, okay, well, you have all this manual process that happens today, a travel request, an expense report, a vacation request, and all of those are happening on a PDF, or it's a Word document that gets printed and signed or emailed. Why not simplify the process so that you're making it faster and more reproducible, and also you're eliminating waste? So that's typically one example where automation comes in, and that's kind of the low-hanging fruit. And then in other scenarios, they just often have a complex business problem that maybe the entire business process cannot be automated, but there may be parts of it where we can say, okay, we can identify certain areas where we can take out the human aspect of it and automate it when it's pretty clear what's the input, what's the output, what's the process. And it's very easy usually to identify the return on investment when you're looking at the amount of time people are spending on certain workflows, when you're looking at the potential risk of making an error. One example I give is when you have anything around sales. Well, if the process to get a statement of work or an RFP processed and signed, you may have already missed the deadline, you may have already lost that deal. If you can automate that, you may have a better chance, so you're reducing risk that way.
Let me ask you this kind of sideways question here. So what's the difference between this definition, these descriptions of going in and automating key workloads, key business activities versus business transformation, which people are talking about? Do you define them slightly differently?
I think business transformation is a bit of a loaded term that's being used today. Digital transformation, business transformation, there's really a lot of elements to it. I would say that the business process automation, workflow automation, there's even a lot of words for that. I would say that that's a subset of what business transformation is all about. It's really taking, when I think of business transformation, it's looking at overall, where is your business today as a whole, and where do you see it in the future, and then basically that whole transition. And the transition can be partially automation of work, but it can also be reorganization. It can also be better engagement with your audience, better communication, better collaboration. So there's a lot of elements that make up the business transformation story.
Yeah. So I agree with that description, because it's I mean, you could decide to, as looking at digital transformation, say, you know what, we just are less efficient in this area, therefore maybe we refocus our business. It's
Exactly.
I mean, that in ongoing operations management, I mean, you constantly look at those things and say how we can improve, where we could do better, where we leave it away or alone because the cost of moving and the benefits achieved by upgrading technology or changing this are lower than so the costs are higher than the value achieved. Therefore, let's stay where we are. And you look at that, but it's all right. So sorry, I just wanted to kind of put that out there, get your thoughts too, just because, you know, people might look at that and say, well, what's the difference between those two? And I agree. You have one that is this broader look at the entire business versus automation is really kind of a focus in that core area around, you know, business process, you know, a specific technology or platform or a workload.
Right.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, and I would say that actually one of the big differences that I find in other areas in business transformation, whether it's collaboration, communication, is that there's often an element of adoption, of training, where people have to really understand how they move from today's world to the new world.
Mm-hmm.
But with business automation, I find it actually the other way around, because you're going from something that's more manual to something that's more automated. So you're actually simplifying the world a lot more. Something that may have been 15 steps, it's one step for the user. So the whole training and adoption element becomes so much simpler. It's almost like you don't have to teach them. You just have to tell them, you fill out a form and you used to email it to this person and wait for a response. Just email, forget about it, done.
Yeah. Yeah. It's well, let me ask you this. I was actually looking at your note of around streamlining communication and was thinking about a couple different ways. Look, there's so much that's happening inside the Microsoft space. And I think changing a lot of the way that a lot of organizations are, forcing them to think about how they're doing their communication, how they're doing their collaboration. But with all of this focus around, the hyper growth that's happening around Teams and the Skype for Business capabilities being rolled into that, and then the whole question of when do I use Teams versus when do I use Yammer, and kind of those, with all those things going on. When you talk about streamlining communications by looking at Microsoft's, products and services that are out there, what are you talking about to customers? How do you approach that discussion with them about which tools to use that they should start leveraging?
Right. So definitely Teams is definitely one of the major tools, because whatever organization that I speak to, they always have some levels of subunits within the organizations, whether it's projects, whether it is functional units, departments. So, and Teams is usually a pretty good fit because it brings all of that information for those functional units together, their content, their conversations. The question always comes up around Yammer to say, well, where does Yammer fit into the picture? I mean, I've got Teams, and then I can use Skype for my small conversations, but what's the Yammer story? And often it's really a mix of organizational maturity, the size of the organization, but then also the kind of content that they want to share and communicate on. So large organizations where they want to have an open forum, Yammer is a pretty good fit for that. When you want to have something that's more locked down and closer tied to the whole working environment, I find that Teams works better for that. So one thing for sure is that there's no right or wrong answer for all organizations for that story for now. But that's typically the mix. It's those two that I find that work well.
So as far as the broader communication now, like, so talking about streamlining that communication, now you have one business unit that is picking up and using Teams, another one that prefers, over on that side of the business using Yammer. There's another side of the business that is, has built out, spent a lot of time and effort in customizing SharePoint. And now you have some disjointed communications in between those. So how do you approach that? I think we're both getting updates here with our calendars.
Yeah.
How do you? That's something that I hear a lot from different MVPs that are also frustrated with that. And I know how I go in and I approach that and talk to people about that. How do you approach that question from a communication standpoint? Because right. Throwing more tools into the mix by default causes confusion to communication at the company level.
Absolutely. I think it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, you have the multiple tools and certain groups or departments may be used to the tools. Then you've got IT screaming because they need to support all these different tools. There might be additional licensing. There might be a lot of headaches. I always feel that the more you can standardize on things, the easier it becomes, especially when you want to have champions within your organization. So champion from one department can help serve another department if they're working on a similar platform. When everybody starts doing their own thing, that becomes a bit more complex. Another thing is that if you want to start sharing some of that communication. So today it might be that every department does their own thing. But what if at some point you want to say, okay, well, we have our departmental communication, but we want to reach out and work with another department. Mm-hmm. Well, if they're in a different platform, that's not going to work. And if it is going to work, that means you're going to have to do some integration. So my typical approach when I try to have these conversations is to try to standardize as much as possible. It might be more than one tool, but at least at the same level, try to leverage the same tools as much as possible. So Yammer, you can use it organizationally, and then departmentally or functionally try to use something like Teams.
So how that works practically is the way I interpret what you just said is like as an executive team, as IT to come together with recommendations and say, look, here are the scenarios. This is how we're going to work as a company. You're always though going to have somebody that says, look, that doesn't make any sense for us. We work this way. And, but that's, the way that I go and talk to customers about that scenario is, I think exactly that message. Like you need to figure out what's right for the company at that level. I've presented on for the last couple of years. There's a book called The Social Organization. I don't know if you've seen it. I know Richard has, because Richard and I have talked about this like 3 years ago. Right. He'll deny the conversation, of course, but no. But it's what's great about it, the authors broke it down into kind of 3 simple things. They said with communication and collaboration, it's the same, is that you need to understand what is the community that you're speaking to. And so when you're looking at the entire company, there's the community you're trying to reach. And as an IT organization, you need to think about what's needed for the scope of that community. 2, what is the right social interaction? It doesn't mean social technology. It means what's the way that we need to communicate for that community? What's the purpose and things around that? Then the 3rd one is, and then having that purpose, knowing what the goal of that. So if you know the community, which is our entire company, you know that the types of communication that we must have for that community, and then the purpose, the goals of this, that then drives, hey, this is the technology that we're going to go and use.
Right.
Where it gets more complex is at the next level, is that when you're talking about a business unit, you get the whole company. Now you've got a business unit, which might be 1/3 of the company. In the business unit, you might have then a team with 10 people, and then you might have a project with 3 people working on it. Each of those different levels is a different community that has different technology, communication, collaboration needs, and has a different goal and purpose. So by forcing everybody, I think this is Microsoft's message. Sorry, I'm like totally soapboxing. I know this, but it's Microsoft's message has shifted over the years to say that, look, you can't go and you need to have those guidelines, those goals, and this is what the community is. But you can't then go force the business unit, the team, the project folks to then use what was designed for this community and these needs and that purpose for their different scope and purpose.
Absolutely. You always got to start with what's the need. That's always the first thing. What's the needs? Who are the users? That's ultimately what's going to drive the decision. Now, there many times are kind of the hard and fast requirements that they just can't deviate from, like security, being able to lock down,
compliance. All of those things, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
And then that's going to be the kind of the softer ones where, I'd love this button to be green, and I'm sorry, but Yammer has it in blue, so I'm sorry, but I can't use Yammer. Right? So that's where you kind of got to be a little bit more flexible and say, okay, well, maybe you can't have it all, but at least the core points that you mentioned before around what's the community, what's the purpose, what's the needs of communication, those are being addressed. And if you're going to be looking at, somebody could argue that, well, you can use a Yammer group or you can use Microsoft Teams, and those 3 would be the same because you could lock it down and you can have people communicate and they could share content and they could share links. So often it will become a question of, okay, well, what's sometimes there's history. We tried Yammer, we hated it, nobody wants to use Yammer. Okay, so maybe we do have to try something that's a little bit fresher, or maybe we have to use Yammer behind the scenes so people don't know that it's Yammer until they realize they go, oh, wow, okay, we didn't know that we were not using it properly. Yeah. So I really think that it's not a black or white question around this whole communication.
Well, and exactly, and that's why I think as you're looking at ways to go in, back to kind of the streamlining communication and improving that is that I think you have to know what your constraints are. You have to know what the securities, the compliance, kind of all those the rules are, and especially if you're in a regulated industry, I mean, you need to be very careful about those things, and then understand the community, the communication, the purpose of each of those things. But even if you had, let's just generically say that company-wide, business unit-wide, team-wide, and then project-wide could be, all different technologies and different styles in each of those. But when you have the purpose and you understand that, and then make sure that each of those has to meet those constraints, that's a lot different. That's complex, but it's not Wild West. It's not just people doing anything. It's within reason. And
you give them many to choose from, but it's control. So you've touched a couple of points, a couple of times you touched on compliance, which is really important for a lot of organizations. So if you're working in the cloud, in the Office 365 space, so if you're going to be using Yammer Conversations or Microsoft Teams, or in the past, if you used to use the SharePoint Conversations, Office 365 Group Conversations, you can get to that content. If you need to do some discovery, you can get to that content because it's centrally managed. If you start to introduce, I love the term rogue IT, but people start using their own solutions, that's when you can get into issues where, where's the content? We're trying to find something. We know we had a conversation. Yeah, it's sitting somewhere in somebody else's cloud, and somebody else, someone has access to that now.
Right.
So that's where, you definitely want to give option to the users, but they have to be controlled.
Yeah, there's I know we're running out of time here, but that's like actually I think one great benefit of Teams, especially in the future, is that if you start surfacing all of those unofficial or these rogue IT solutions that are out there, but people are surfacing those through Teams, it could almost be a way that you can. It's kind of like look. please let us know if you're using something that's not supported. Let's have a conversation about that, because a lot of times it might be that it's an education issue. Like they're not aware that there is something that's supported that does exactly what they need, and they just need to be educated on that. Or if they're using this thing because they've used it at a past company, and it's non-compliant, there's all these different issues, and you have conversations like, here's why you can't use it. But by having that conversation and setting up, and I would say this is key to streamlining communications, is that the conversations about, here's why I'm using it, here's why what's in the supported ecosystem does not meet these needs, I have these requirements. Then IT can, the governance body, whoever makes the decisions in your organization, can say, okay, we understand why, valid reasons for that. All right, we're going to, grandfather this in, or we're going to manage this, manually, but we need to follow these steps. We need to be able to log in and get access to this. You get hit by a bus tomorrow, and all of that corporate IT is out in this cloud that no one can get to but you. That's a problem. So you can use that. However, we must have access. We need to have every 30 days a report, and there needs a backup, whatever those things are. But you have that conversation, and I think that's a much better a way of approaching this than locking down external, like that, not allowing and shutting it down without having a conversation of why they're doing it in the first place.
Right. And typically with governance, it's the preference is to lock things down and not let users do things that they shouldn't be able to do.
That's the historic way that we've handled all things in IT, and certainly in the SharePoint world. But I mean, that was my IT experience throughout my almost 30-year career.
Don't give them a loaded gun; they're not going to shoot themselves in the foot, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, this is interesting. Like, I know we kind of jumped between different things, and it's almost always my fault. But I think some great topics here to pick up and discuss again. And maybe we need to do that, you and I, and maybe we'll let Richard join us and have a conversation. We do a webinar and go through and talk about that. Because I put this stuff in kind of like that practical governance and operations management. I've been in a lot of operations roles throughout my career. And it's nice to go and talk about, and you should do this, and this is the best practice. And then there's what actually happens on the ground. And it's great to sit and have those conversations, talk about it end to end, what it actually looks like to sit with the client and have a conversation about, let's go in and look at these workloads, these activities, and talk about how can we automate? How can we improve this while not losing communication across the company and adhering to our standards?
Right. No, absolutely. And governance is often something that's at the core. And many organizations will look at governance as a thick book that's dusty sitting on a shelf, and nobody.
It's a binder, not a book. It's a binder. It's three.
It's a binder. Yes, it's a binder. And if you can start introducing your automation into governance, so that governance is actually managed by the system, you don't need to worry about people reading manuals and those shall do this or not do that. You just, if you can't do it, then you can't do it. Then you don't have to worry about, I did something wrong. I mean, when it comes to communication, it's a bit more tricky because people can start posting messages or posting content that needs to be curated or obscene. But besides that, I mean, if you don't want people to be able to send information, then you block them. If you don't want them to use something in Teams, then you block them.
Governance are guidelines to live by, not rules to die by.
Yes, exactly.
Well, Haniel, thank you so much for your time today. It's great talking as always. It was good to see you 2 weeks ago. I don't know if I'll see you at the next, are you out in SharePoint Fest out west? Are you coming out to Seattle?
Might be going there. Might have another engagement I got to see, but for sure we'll catch up soon.
And how can people get in touch with you? What's the best way to reach you and find you out in the digital world?
So my Twitter handle is my last name, H. Croitoru. So that's my Twitter handle. I'm also on Gmail, hcroitoru@gmail.com. Might be worthwhile if you want to, on the video, put in the handles, because nobody's going to know how to pronounce my last name.
It'll be in there somewhere, but I know. I'd like to put it out there. It's a reminder to me. It's an audible reminder.
For sure.
So anyway, well, thanks a lot. Hey, have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.